However, your benefits are just incremental, right? So that's the idea. And in Fooled by Randomness, that seems to be the main idea that I think he talks about. And I've listened to it a few times, but there's also a lot more in there. Anti-Fragile is about creating systems that benefit from the disorder. So it's about the upside of the negative event. So when I talk about the marijuana story, it's like, okay, instead of, you want to make it to where you benefit from bad things happening. And the way Nassim Taleb talks about it is that something fragile would be like a glass, like a wine glass, right? And if you ship the wine glass somewhere across the country, you would put fragile on it. So because if somebody moves it around, it breaks. Well, the opposite of fragile is not something that withstands being shaken around. It's something that becomes stronger when it's shaken around, right? And so I've been trying to think about how to apply this to business. What kind of business can you have that when something happens, when there's a negative shock, it gets stronger, it gets bigger? And I honestly am not 100% sure, but from what I have been learning from listening to this audiobook is that one of those fields is information. So information is anti-fragile, at least good. Well, not just good information, but information can be anti-fragile, such that when somebody tries to destroy it, it becomes more successful, right? Like think about all the different times for example, the Gulag Archipelago, or however you pronounce that bullshit, by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, about being in the Soviet Union. His book would be an example, or his writings are an example of being anti-fragile. So the more the Communist Party tried to crack down on freedom and tried to censor more and more of the press, the more they're able to accelerate, or the better, they're still able to get the information to flow across. A good example is actually nowadays, I would say, with censorship. So when somebody gets censored online, there's an explosion of notoriety for that person, which probably drives up their traffic and probably drives up people that know them. A good example would be someone like Alex Jones. Whether or not you agree with him, different story. But also Nassim Taleb, though they're not the same at all. Alex Jones and Nassim Taleb are not the same, but Nassim Taleb got notoriety when things blew up because a lot of people were pissed off at him, right? And so whenever people try to destroy you, when you're putting out information, maybe it's books, papers, articles, a lot of times that can make you even more popular. That's an example of an anti-fragile business. So I am not sure of exactly what types of businesses to get into that would be anti-fragile, but it seems in the information or entertainment business could be one. Another good example is Logan Paul. Logan Paul, I'm a little bit older, I think, to be watching him. However, I did watch some of his podcasts that he came out with because the only reason that fucker is on my radar is because of people attacking him last year for some of the stupid shit he did. When he went to the suicide forest in Japan and recorded those people, it put him on the map even more. So, I knew who he was. And not only that, I like to watch the H3H3 podcast. And the H3H3 podcast likes to fucking go after the Paul brothers, Jake and Logan Paul, sometimes for the stupid shit they do. Well, because of that, now I know who they are. And I've seen some of their clips on H3H3 podcast. So whenever Logan Paul came out with his podcast, and then I saw somebody I knew on the podcast, Brendan Schaub, I don't know him, but Brendan Schaub, then I was like, oh, I know who both of these guys are, and I know who Logan Paul is, and this is kind of weird and interesting. And then bam, before I know it, I'm subscribed to his channel. So everyone, all the negative press actually blew him up even more, Logan Paul. And I'm sure there's just countless examples of people like that, where you try to suppress something, try to suppress an individual or a piece of information, and it gets bigger. That is anti-fragile. So business-wise, that would be something to look into. I've been trying to think about different things like that. Asset-wise, I think there's another concept I want to also talk about by Nassim Taleb called Lindy, 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 which basically is the idea that the longer something has been around, basically the chances of it being around are higher and higher as time goes on. And he, in his book Fooled by Randomness, he talked about how it was basically people that were writing plays for Broadway discovered that if a play had been on for a certain amount of time, that there was a high likelihood it would continue to play into the future. And so that's the idea behind something being Lindy. Lindy is when something's existence over time, the fact that it exists over a long period of time, means that it's more likely to exist into the future. So I kind of think that I've been trying to think of like trying to mash up all these different kind of concepts and integrate them into an idea of reality, right? Because it's hard to take some of these counterintuitive concepts, taking the idea of the impact of the highly improbable versus the probability of the highly improbable, taking that and, taking the ideas of anti-fragility as opposed to being robust, and taking the idea of something being Lindy, and it starts to make sense to me why gold is most likely going to be a good investment. And when I say that, of course, I'm not a predictor. I'm not somebody who is like, buy gold now, Roslyn Capital kind of shit. But I have been a proponent of buying gold and silver and precious metals. And I didn't really understand why, except that because they've always been that way. And that is where the Lindy effect, I think, comes in, is that because gold and silver and these precious metals have been used for like thousands of years, the chances that they will continue to be used at some point in the future is pretty high, right? So if the monetary system crashes, which there's, that could definitely happen. All of this paper money stuff is a fairly new experiment in human history on such a global scale. We don't know how it's going to be. But what do we do know that works? We do know that gold and silver work, right? We do know that precious metals work. Okay? It's just like if something happens to technology, well, you know what works? Paper. Paper is Lindy, right? Paper will always be around. Basically writing will be around for forever. Or at least that's how it seems. I could be getting it wrong. Regardless, it's something I wanted to talk about because it's very important. And hopefully I'll be able to go into more detail about Nassim Taleb going after the IQ debate, because he's really smashing some people up in the realm of IQ. So we'll see. And that's it for today, guys. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Do you want to record your own podcast like me? Well, Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now, Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. That means you get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now by reading this ad. That's right, mofos. It's easy. Check it out. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another podcast broadcast with your host, the fantastic Taylor. I want to discuss the idea of Nassim Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile. I have been listening to it on audiobook, and I absolutely fucking love it. So first off, if you don't know who Nassim Taleb is, you need to Google him. You need to find out who he is. If you're a business person, If you're a non-business person, no matter who you are, you will benefit from his work. He's kind of a bit of a, I guess maybe you could say he's a philosopher. I've talked about him in the past. He's a kind of like a modern day philosopher, but he cut his teeth on the trading floors of New York Stock Exchange and stuff like that. He was a trader back in the 90s, I believe. And he has made a lot of money. He wrote a book called The Black Swan, Fooled by Randomness. He's made his money betting on rare events. And I've listened to Fooled by Randomness a few times now, and I've started going through Anti-Fragile. And it seems that one of the main things is that we tend to focus on the probability of events happening instead of the impact of those events, right? So, it would be kind of like, it's kind of like the best. So I used to, let's just say I used to smoke a bit of marijuana back in my younger days as a teenager. And so back in the day, I used to intuitively understand this concept to a degree, though I still played with fire, which was, if you want to go to a friend's house, right? You want to bring some marijuana. The probability that I'm going to get caught with that marijuana in the car is low, right? So you could play with that low probability shit for a long time. So the probability of that is low. However, the impact of being caught is devastating, right? So while the probability of being caught is super low, maybe you only have a little bit in the car, maybe it's hidden well, you're not going very far. Yeah, the probability of being caught is low. But if you are caught, it's hot, the cost is high. So you're actually better off not taking it in the car, because even if there's a small percent chance, you over time, you're better off just not ever taking it with you, right? And that's kind of the idea with, at least that's an example I can think of that's kind of like a street idea that correlates with financials and stock market, which is that with Nassim Taleb, his strategy was, or what he noted was that most people invest with the idea that, rare events have a small probability of occurring, right? However, when they do occur, they wipe everything out, and so you might make, a couple dollars every single day for 5 or 10 years, with the small probability of losing, you have what seemingly high probability of making a little bit of money over 10 years. But then you also have you have this unknown probability, which seems small, of losing it all. But the possibility that you could lose it all is such that you should invest your money so that way you're protected against the outcome of the rare event as opposed to the probability of the rare event. So sorry if that's kind of going into, if it's a little too technical. I don't think it is, especially for me being borderline retarded, if I'm allowed to say that word anymore. And it makes sense, right? Like if you have like $500,000 and that's all the money you have, and you're going to put it in the market, you're better off making it such that you are insured against the worst case scenario, even if you make almost no money. Even if you lose money for 10 years, you lose a little bit of money all the time because you're invested in like a safe asset, or you're invested in, like say a safe asset. But then once a decade, there's a catastrophe and everybody else loses all of their money and you make a lot of money. It's almost basically the idea is that you don't even worry so much about the upside, it seems to me, but you have to look at the potential downside. So like I said, it's not about the probability of being caught by the police. It's about the outcome, right? So bring it back to the marijuana example. If the cost of getting caught with marijuana in your car was the death penalty automatically, right? Even the probability of bringing marijuana in your car, though being low, the probability is low, but the impact of being caught is so high that just about everyone would say no thanks. Almost no one would take that risk. Of course, people would take the risk. Some people always do take the risk, right? But most people who would think about it would be like, no, this is crazy, right? Like, why would I risk my entire life for something so small? So that's the idea with the financial markets, is that most investments or many investments, you have the potential to lose all of your money in a catastrophic event,